So if you listen to mainstream media over the past few days, Palantir is diluting its shareholders again. Everybody is in the news talking about how insiders in Palantir are selling heavy, how Palantir is diluting their retail investors, and that whole FUD that we heard many years in the past. It's coming back because there's a lot of new investors in Palantir that have not heard this FUD, so they're trying to play this again. Now look, Palantir, as you can see on the screen right now, and by the way, this is powered by Stock MVP, it's my software. You have a coupon code here for last 40% off. It's your software, my guy. Go get it, 40% off. And on Stock MVP, we have this little thing here that shows you how much insiders are selling, how much insiders are buying, and how much institutional shareholders are buying into Palantir. Now, on the face of it, if you take a look at this thing right here, you see there's a red line that represents the sales of the past 3 months, and the blue line that represents the buys. And you might think that, well, Tom, it shows that Palantir insiders are dumping shares. Look, all this insider acquisition activity is, they bought 10 million shares and they sold 15.7 million shares. So they're selling like crazy. Well, not exactly. Predominantly, I would say above 95% of this entire chart right here, sales and buys, are both not real sales and not real buys. Even though you see 15 million sales and 10 million buys, it's all BS. None of this is real, and I'll explain why. So Palantir has a stock-based compensation plan. They're awarding stock to their employees, and then once these stock actually vest every quarter, then the employee actually gets taxed. And as the part of the conversion and you get taxed, you have to sell a certain amount of stock to pay the tax liability because you're getting taxed out of pocket and you haven't really gotten any cash. So whenever stocks that get vested actually get converted, well, there's a tax event and these guys have to pay. So they sell about half the stock to pay for the tax. They keep the other half. Now, I'm not saying that every single time that's what's happening, but mostly 95% of the time, every single sale and buy you see here, the buy is most likely a conversion. It's not a real open market buy. It's just a conversion of options. And the sale is not a real open market sale. It's just a sale for tax purposes of about half of the grant. That's why you're seeing the acquisitions versus the sales 15 to 10. Now, obviously, it's not 100%, but at the end of the day, I would say about 10% of this is open market, secondary market. 90% of this is just options activity. And all these things are basically 10b5 plans. It means that all of this selling activity and buying activity is pre-programmed into the activity of Palantir. Essentially, if I get a grant for the next 10 years, I pre-program for every single conversion and every single vesting, I pre-program a sale that's triggered upon the conversion so I can pay the taxes. So none of this is actually people sitting in front of the computer screen saying, oh, I want to sell, I want to dump my shares right now. It's just absolutely normal. So that's number one. Now, there's also this debate about Palantir, whether, Palantir is absolutely diluting its shareholders, it's been abusing retail investors, and so forth and so forth. Now, look, I have to explain and again, image is always more efficient, these things, than I am. But let me show you something right here. On the left-hand side, you see the amount of Palantir shares. And as you can see, the shares that started at 600 million shares in 2020, now at 2.3 billion shares in 2023. So you might think that, the share count of Palantir, quadrupled in 3 years. And that is technically true. But again, of course, there's a nuance here. The first thing you have to notice here that it doubled twice. And I'll show you why it doubled twice. The first time it doubled, it happened before the company even went public. So the first jump from 640 million shares to almost 1 billion shares happened before Palantir became a public company. This company chose to go public by way of DPO, direct public offering, which means there's no big banks involved, there's no favoritism, nepotism, and all that good stuff. There's no middleman. The company basically sold its shares directly from the employees, from the executives, from the directors. Anybody who had Palantir shares essentially made the market on day one of them going direct public offering. Now, for that to happen, the company literally had to do a split, quasi-split. So they increased the share count of the existing shareholders before the company went public from 600 million to 900 million in order to allow these employees and these insiders and whoever held Palantir shares to be able to make the market for the Palantir shares. So that's why when Palantir went public, they had 1 billion shares outstanding. Now, the other thing here you have to understand is that in 2020, when the second jump happened, it also happened for a reason. The second jump was the expiration of the 10-year options plan. So the executives in Palantir, They had a 10-year plan that they were granted in 2010. But eventually, in 2020, it expired. It expired, and the company had to grant a new plan for all these executives. And that grant is essentially the second jump. So the second jump from 900 million to 1.7 billion to 1.76 billion happened because of the secondary grant for the most part. And other things like hiring a brand new sales force for the company, which didn't really exist. So imagine setting up a whole new division in your company that didn't really exist. So as you can see, the growth in the share count pretty much stopped once it had those two things. Since this point right here, which is the end of all the housekeeping they had to do, they grew at a rate of 9% per year. So Palantir is diluting at 9% per year. Now, look, you might say that's a lot. You might say that that's too much. But let's compare them to other companies. And let's compare them on basis of, as the percentage of revenues. How much money is Palantir making versus how much stock-based compensation is giving out. And there's this wonderful chart I want to show right now. It's done by my friend Amir. So Palantir is at 27%. And this was an old chart. Ever since then, Palantir went down to 21%. But look at other companies. C3AI is diluting at 63% stock-based compensation as a percentage of revenue. So that means the amount of stock-based comp they're giving out is 2/3 of their revenue. Snowflake is at 40%. Datadog is at 22.8%. ServiceNow is at 20%. Salesforce, 10%. Now, ever since that point, Palantir actually came down to 21%. So they would be ranked below Datadog and above ServiceNow, between 19 and 22. So Palantir, based on its current dilution, is not anything unusual compared to the other companies in its category. The Datadogs, the Snowflake, the C3AIs. Because at the end of the day, this chart right here in Stock MVP, shows you how much institutional shareholders are buying into Palantir since it went public. So this was 2020. This is currently right now. So ever since it went public, the share count went from 176 million to 815 million. Now, at this point, you might jump and say, well, Tom, the share count also went from 640 million to 2.3 billion, so that doesn't count. In 2020, in Q3 2020, institutional shareholders held about 27% of Palantir. Currently, institutional shareholders, just 3 years later, are holding 36% of Palantir. So Palantir institutional shareholders increased their position in Palantir by 31% in 3 years. And that pace has nothing to do with the dilution. That's just a percentage. So this has nothing to do with dilution. Institutional shareholders are buying into Palantir at a much faster pace than the share count is increasing. And even if you have arguments against the stock-based compensation of Palantir, the Palantir is still the absolute king of revenue per employee. Snowflake is generating $340,000 revenue per employee. C3I, $380,000, a little bit better. Datadog, $370,000. Salesforce, $394,000. So you can see that companies operate within a range of $330,000 to $400,000 per employee of revenue. Palantir, with its stock-based compensation, is generating $520,000 per employee. Better than Salesforce, better than the Datadog, better than Snowflake, better than C3I, better than all these guys. And to me, it's quite clear that Palantir is definitely allocating that stock-based compensation correctly because they're literally deriving more revenue per employee than anybody you can compare them with. Look, at the end of the day, look at the numbers. If institutional shareholders thought that Palantir is dumping and it's abusing shareholders and it's a huge scheme by insiders to sell and dump, would they have increased their holding in the company by almost 5 times in the past 3 years, from 170 to 820? And of course, I'm just saying, even with the dilution, it's a 31% increase in institutional shareholder over the past 3 years. So all in all, look, there's obviously some, factual incorrectness in these arguments, but that's what they say. The best way to create a lie is to mix in some truth with it. So they take all this data that technically kind of makes sense and they wrap it around with a nice little bow on top of FUD and inaccuracies. So that way it sounds very reasonable because you look at the chart, you see, oh, look at this, all this insider selling. Oh my God. Yeah, you're right. No, it's a lie mixed in with a little bit of truth technically to make it sound a little bit better. The truth is in the numbers. Go a little bit deeper, research for yourself, find out what's actually going on. Don't let them fool you. By the way, a huge shout out to our Patreon community. You guys have killed it. Patreon.com/Tom Nash. We completely sold out of Tom's Academy spots. They're gone. The founding members of the Academy, you locked it in at 35. Congratulations. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.